Welcome to War Bios, the podcast where we delve into the intricacies of military history's most pivotal conflicts. I'm your host, General Biography, and today we're going to explore one of the most fascinating battles of the Napoleonic Wars, the Battle of La Rothière. This engagement, fought on February 1, 1814, was a crucial turning point in the war, showcasing the strategic brilliance and tactical innovation that defined this era of combat. As we set the stage for our examination of the Battle of La Rothière, let's immerse ourselves in the historical context of this pivotal event. The year 1813 had been a disastrous one for Napoleon, with the catastrophic Russian campaign and the subsequent defeat at Leipzig marking a significant shift in the balance of power in Europe. The Sixth Coalition, comprising Russia, Prussia, Austria, and their allies, had formed to counter the French Empire's expansionist ambitions. In the winter of 1813–1814, Napoleon's army was in disarray, with many of its veteran troops either killed or wounded in previous battles. Despite these challenges, Napoleon remained determined to defend his empire against the advancing coalition forces. The town of La Rothière, situated in the northeastern part of France, was a strategic location that controlled access to several important roads and highways. The coalition forces, driven by a desire to defeat Napoleon once and for all, had assembled a formidable army, with troops from across Europe marching towards the French border. The Russians, under the command of General Gebhard von Blücher, were renowned for their bravery and horsemanship, while the Austrian infantry, led by General Karl Philipp zu Schwarzenberg, was known for its discipline and firepower. The Prussians, under the command of General Friedrich Wilhelm von Bülow, added to the coalition's military might. As we explore the origins of the Battle of La Rothière, it's essential to consider the complex web of alliances and strategic calculations that underpin this conflict. The coalition forces were not a unified entity, but rather a loose alliance of nations with competing interests and agendas. The Russians, for example, were primarily concerned with securing their western border and preventing Napoleon from expanding his empire further east. The Austrians, on the other hand, were driven by a desire to restore their dominance over Central Europe and limit French influence in the region. In January 1814, Napoleon's army was deployed along the Marne River with its headquarters at Champaubert. However, as the coalition forces advanced, Napoleon knew that he had to make a difficult decision: either stand his ground and risk defeat, or retreat further west and cede territory to the enemy. The town of La Rothière, with its strategic location and defensive potential, became a crucial factor in Napoleon's calculations. As we delve deeper into the history of the Battle of La Rothière, it becomes clear that this engagement was not just a simple clash of arms, but rather a complex and multifaceted conflict that involved intricate strategic maneuvering, diplomatic intrigue, and heroic acts of bravery. The fate of Europe hung in the balance, and the outcome of the Battle of La Rothière would have far-reaching consequences for the future of the continent. The battle began with a series of skirmishes between French and coalition forces as Napoleon's army sought to defend its positions along the Marne River. The Russians, under General Gebhard von Blücher, launched a series of bold attacks against the French lines, but were repeatedly repelled by the determined defenders. Meanwhile, the Austrian infantry, led by General Karl Philipp zu Schwarzenberg, began to outflank the French positions, threatening to encircle and cut off their retreat. As the battle raged on, Napoleon himself rode onto the battlefield, his presence inspiring his troops to fight with renewed ferocity. The emperor's tactical genius was on full display as he expertly maneuvered his forces, using his cavalry to devastating effect against the coalition's exposed flanks. The French artillery, meanwhile, pounded the enemy lines with precise and deadly fire, weakening their resolve and creating opportunities for the French infantry to launch decisive counterattacks. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Battle of La Rothière was the heroic performance of the French cavalry, who charged into the fray time and again, cutting down coalition soldiers and shattering their formations. The legendary Marshal Michel Ney, known as the bravest of the brave, led from the front, his courage and example inspiring his men to fight with unyielding valor. As the day wore on, the coalition forces began to gain ground, but at a terrible cost in blood and treasure. The Russians, in particular, suffered heavily, their gallant charges against the French lines being repeatedly repelled with heavy losses. Despite these setbacks, the coalition commanders remained resolute, knowing that the fate of Europe hung in the balance. The turning point of the battle came when the Austrian infantry finally succeeded in outflanking the French positions, threatening to encircle and cut off their retreat. Napoleon, realizing the gravity of the situation, ordered a desperate counterattack, which was led by the fearless Marshal Auguste de Marmont. The French troops fought with every ounce of strength they possessed, but ultimately they were unable to stem the tide of the coalition's advance. As the sun began to set on February 4, 1814, the Battle of La Rothière was all but over. The French army had suffered a crushing defeat, and Napoleon's grip on Europe was beginning to slip. Despite this setback, the emperor remained undaunted, his strategic mind already racing ahead to the next challenge, the next battle, and the next opportunity to turn the tide of war in his favor. As we reflect on the Battle of La Rothière, it's clear that this engagement marked a significant turning point in the Napoleonic Wars. The coalition forces had finally found a way to defeat the French army, and the momentum of the war was beginning to shift irreversibly against Napoleon. The defeat at La Rothière marked a significant turning point in Napoleon's fortunes, as the coalition forces began to gain momentum and push the French army back on all fronts. The emperor's grip on Europe, which had once seemed unshakable, was beginning to slip, and his armies were facing unprecedented challenges on multiple fronts. In the months that followed, the coalition forces continued to press their advantage, launching a series of bold attacks against the French positions in northeastern France. The Russian army, under the command of General Gebhard von Blücher, played a key role in these campaigns, using its superior numbers and firepower to devastating effect against the French lines. Meanwhile, the Austrian infantry, led by General Karl Philipp zu Schwarzenberg, continued to outmaneuver and outflank the French positions, threatening to encircle and cut off their retreat. The legendary Marshal Michel Ney, who had fought so bravely at La Rothière, found himself facing increasingly desperate circumstances as he struggled to hold back the coalition's advance. As the war drew to a close, Napoleon's strategic mind was still racing ahead, searching for ways to turn the tide of battle in his favor. However, despite his best efforts, the emperor was ultimately unable to stem the coalition's advance, and on March 31, 1814, the Allied armies entered Paris, marking the end of Napoleon's reign and the fall of the French Empire. The Treaty of Fontainebleau, signed on April 11, 1814, officially ended the Napoleonic Wars, and Napoleon was exiled to the island of Elba. The treaty marked a significant turning point in European history, as the continent began to rebuild and reorganize itself after years of conflict and upheaval. The legacy of the Battle of La Rothière can still be felt today, as military historians and strategists continue to study the tactics and maneuvers employed by Napoleon and his opponents. The battle marked a significant shift in the balance of power in Europe, as the coalition forces demonstrated their ability to work together effectively and defeat a powerful enemy through a combination of superior numbers, firepower, and strategic maneuvering. As we reflect on the Battle of La Rothière, it's clear that this engagement played a pivotal role in shaping the course of European history. The bravery and sacrifice of the soldiers who fought on both sides will never be forgotten, and their example continues to inspire military leaders and historians around the world. In conclusion, the Battle of La Rothière was a defining moment in the Napoleonic Wars, marking a significant turning point in the conflict and shaping the future of Europe. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.